This episode is about your money, what your government does with your money, where your taxes go. This is a scandal. This is your scandal. We are your favorite hosts. This is your favorite show. We will tell you everything. Long live public finance. Welcome to Watching the Wheels. I'm Amit, and these are my good friends, Shruti and Pranay. Today is a very big day. You're watching this on the 28th of August. On the 26th of August, there was a release of a magnificent new book by Pranay Kothastane and Sarthak Pradhan called Fiscal Fables. What is the book about? It's about your money. In other words, it's about public finance. And it's a subject that sounds arcane, but should concern all of us because it is literally about our money and what the government does with it. And this book is just a masterful exposition of this, and I convinced Pranay and Shruti to also do another masterful exposition of this on this very show, Watching the Wheels. So we intend for this episode to be as in-depth as possible on the subject, but at the same time in language that everyone can understand, and therefore it is a resource for all times to come. It is one for the ages.
So, Milton Friedman famously said that there are four ways to spend money. You can spend your own money on yourself. You can spend your own money on someone else. You can spend someone else's money on yourself. And then there is the last category, which is you can spend someone else's money on someone else. And then you fundamentally become a distributor or a redistributor of funds. Government spending comes squarely in this last category. And today we're having a discussion on government spending and the excellent new book called Fiscal Fables, A Citizen's Guide to Public Finance by our very own Pranay Kothastane and his excellent co-author Sarthak Pradhan, who's also his colleague at Takshashila. So just to have a starting point, since you have the word citizen in the title of the book, Pranay, why should citizens care about government spending and government money?
Thanks, both of you. So this is the book. And the main aim of the book was like what Amit began with, this word arcane, right? Public finance is often an arcane subject. But there are so many public finance conversations which happen all around us, right? When people talk about freebies, when people bring out reports that you should have wealth tax and tax the rich, when you have questions about Karnataka saying that why is our money going to Uttar Pradesh, and so on and so forth. All these are questions related to public finance, but they are often conducted in a political economy frame, right? So always the question becomes about this party or that party, or whether it becomes a question of whether a party is not treating another state fairly, so on and so forth. But on very few occasions, I see we using public finance lenses for questions of public finance. So that was really the reason why we thought we should write a book which explains public finance in a way that people can relate to. And we've gone one step further. It's not just the book, because this is the AI age. So we've also released a set of a website. It's a playground for people to really try things, to see how their state budgets change, to see how their income tax money, if this is the income tax season has just got over in India. So the huge sum that you've given to the government, how does that go in a representative way across all the functions of the government, and a bunch of other things. So we thought citizens should know this much more carefully, and that's why we thought of writing this book. Now, going one step further, I thought there are like broadly 5 reasons why all of us should care about government money. First reason, as Amit always says, taxes are not voluntary, they are coercive. There's an act of coercion, and it's the hard-earned money of all the people which gets used for many other means. And that's why we need to be careful, right? So it's literally our money. And we've seen many occasions where when a tax system is perceived to be unfair, or it does not deliver something in return, there are lots of revolts. All of these stories about government rebellions are often they begin with money. There is some element of public finance involved, right? And there are so many stories about it. Classic example being Gandhi's Salt March itself. And it was because it was seen as an unfair act, and that's why there was this revolt and rebellion, etc. So these kinds of things are important, and taxes often become are coercive, and that's why we need to know where they are going. That's one. Second is where you began with, Shruti. Actually, there was a really nice study which is called Opportunity Cost Neglect in Public Policy. We linked to that paper, but that paper did a very interesting thing. It had people from outside the government and people who are experts of public health within the government, and they were asked whether they'll support a public health program, and some number was given to that. And most people said, yeah, we should fund, right? Public health. Why would anyone say no to it? But then in the next stage, the researchers were explicitly reminded that this money could be used for something else. Essentially, they were reminded about opportunity cost, that something like this exists, and the support for that dropped by 10%. So immediately you could see that even the experts, people who are in the public health domain, realize that, hey, there could be a better use of that particular money rather than that particular program, right? So what this means is that opportunity cost neglect is very commonplace in public policy, right? And it doesn't happen in private spending. Anytime we spend our own money, we know we try to economize, we try to find out the best possible value for it. But when it is in public spending, we essentially ignore this. And that's really because we often think that money belongs to someone else. It's like monopoly money with some extra zeros, right? So we don't even think of that as our own money. But when people are reminded, then they do consider that, oh, this was my money. So that's the reason. And that's where Milton Friedman's 4 ways to spend money comes in, right? And as you rightly said, this money we think belongs to someone else and is being spent on someone else. So we don't economize, and we don't even know what's the best use of it. Okay. So that's the second reason. The third reason is something called marginal cost of public funds, because whenever people say government should do raise an extra 1,000 crore or new policy, it just requires 2,000 crore. Why shouldn't the government spend on it? But we often forget that to raise that 2,000 crore money, the cost to society is not 2,000 crore. It is actually much more than 2,000 crore, because collecting taxes is not frictionless. Every rupee of tax which is raised also has market distortionary effects, and there is tax administration. All those things increase the cost to society, and people have tried to estimate numbers. In Service of the Republic tries to estimate that number at rupee 3 for India. So essentially, for every rupee of ours that you give to the government, the cost to society is nearly rupees 3. And that's why, again, it's important that that money goes into areas where the benefits are more than rupee 3 rather than rupee 1 for money, for a rupee taken from you, right? So again, that's the third reason why we should worry. The fourth reason is what Adolf Wagner's principle of Wagner's law. Now, again, this thing is we discussed this in the previous episodes. One thing I have been worried about is the fact that this global industrial policy is having a moment. A lot of countries are trying to spend more. So if we don't think of this at this moment, we might just end up increasing government spending without that spending becoming really effective, right? So it's very easy for governments to just say, I want to spend money on 5 semiconductor fabs. Who will say no, right? And because in any case, the world is a lot more dangerous in terms of at least the geopolitics side. So governments can always justify, for strategic reasons, national security reasons, we should spend more, right? And this is already happening when the welfare state has expanded since World War II. Right? We've seen that happening. Government spending actually increases as GDP per capita increases. So that's the Wagner's law. And we've seen that richer countries end up spending more as a percentage of GDP when they become richer. Right? So that's really one thing which worries me. So that's why we thought we should discuss this. So these are sort of all the reasons which motivated us that this book should be written, and it should be written in a way that most citizens can read, can play around with the data and see what this money goes for, so that that opportunity cost neglect at least decreases to some extent.
That's a great setup, Pranay. So, there are two Wagners, right? There's Adolf Wagner, and you mentioned his law, which is as countries get richer, they spend more. There's also Richard Wagner, who is, one of my teachers at George Mason. I took lots of seminars with him, and also, one of my intellectual heroes. And actually, there's also the anti-Wagner law. And I think we've talked about this before, because Richard Wagner wrote a scathing critique of Adolf Wagner's law. And he showed I think the paper was in 1977, and he and Weber showed that what Wagner finds is not holding true for the post-World War II period. And what he really finds is it's not just as a country gets richer, it's also about the political institutions. So if you don't have appropriate political institutions, checks and balances, a way to actually rein the hands of government when they're trying to raise debts or deficits, that's when you see increase in government spending. And that almost sets up your book perfectly, right? Like the imagination for it is, as Indians, we should expect, as we get richer, there's going to be more government spending, but also the nature of that government spending is going to be sort of unwieldy. It's also not going to get spent on the most important things. We're not going to care about the opportunity cost. We're not going to care about the the marginal cost to society for every rupee that is raised and spent. And this is where all the political institutions start coming in. But before that, there is also a question of how we tax, right? So not every tax is identical, right? Are there some taxes which are good versus some taxes which are bad? Do you favor certain kinds of taxes over other kinds of taxes? Like, what is your opinion on that, and from the book? Because you have lots of examples.
Yeah, Shruti. So what we wanted to essentially do is collect a lot of examples from Indian experience, because most of the bad ideas about taxes which keep coming back have already been tried in India, and we know the results. So let's begin broadly. What are the kinds of taxes, right? So one kind of tax is the tax on income. Right. So this could be income of a company or income of an individual. So people generally call it direct tax also, but you can call it as taxes on income. The second kind of tax is tax on consumption. So these are the taxes. GST is an example. Whenever you are consuming something, you end up paying a tax, and every individual in India pays GST. Even if you are poor, you are purchasing any biscuit packet, you are paying that tax. So that's the second one. And the third one is a tax on the stock, which is the tax on wealth, right? So the income is a flow, and wealth is a stock. So you can also be taxed on the assets that you own, right? So those are called wealth taxes. So these assets can be your house, or it could be the gold that you have, or a nice painting that you own. All of those could be examples of wealth that people have, and there could be taxes on that as well. So these are broadly the three categories of taxes. And what we wanted to do is just collect examples in the past. How has it been done? And there are some interesting examples that come up, right? Even before those three categories, we can talk about taxes and what does it mean by the legal and economic incidence of taxes. Because we often think that if some corporate is put an additional tax, how is it? It's not going to affect me. So what's the problem? Right? But we understand from economics that legal incidence versus economic incidence is very different. Right? So let's take an example which we explain in the book. Let's say we are buying chocolate, and for ease of understanding, suppose it costs $100, and the government says that we'll put an 18% tax on it. Now, intuitively we'll think that the price of this will become 118, right? An 18% tax. But generally that's not how it works, right? Because the producer will knows that if I suddenly increase by 18%, I am going to lose customers, because we know that the demand curve sloped downwards, because as the price increases, suddenly people will stop purchasing it, right? So the producer will be very careful, and they will not pass the entire 18%, 18 rupees to the consumer. So generally, let's take an example where they might split it this way. They might pass 10 rupee burden to the consumer, and they themselves, the producers, might have to absorb some amount of pain, and they absorb the 8 rupee burden, right? So that means that the chocolate is finally available at 110 rupees and rupees 92 net to the producer. So what we see is that the producers whose cost of production was more than 92 are not able to sell those things, and the consumers who cannot afford to pay more than 100 are not able to buy those things. And that essentially what we see is the loss in surplus of both the consumer and the producer, and that a part of it is what we call the deadweight loss, and that reflects as some transactions which could have happened without the tax, but they don't happen. The broad lesson from this is whether a person pays the tax, whether the company pays the tax, the effect of that is felt by everyone in the supply chain, right? So that is something we should keep in mind, and that often doesn't happen. Now let's come to the examples from the Indian experience as well, right? So we often see these reports which come out, right, that inequality is rising, so the way to stop this inequality is put a wealth tax on the top 2% of Indians or something like that, right? Now this has been tried before. In fact, in 1957, India brought in a wealth tax. So this was the height of the Nehruvian socialism era. Of course, wealth taxes had to come in, and the government said we should charge people. And in fact, it was very interesting. First, it started on property, stocks, gold, then even on cars. Right. So there were taxes on number of cars that you have, and depending on the number of cars, you will have additional taxes. It's not just on the purchase of the car. There you were obviously paying some taxes, but these were also taxes because you had possessed the car, right? And yearly you had to pay a wealth tax. Now this started in 1957, and it continued for many decades. But what we see is that the amount of money that was collected from all this was really small. So in 2013-14 financial year, the total tax raised through wealth tax was 0.1% of the direct taxes that the government collected that year. So we did have wealth taxes. And this was the manthan of all this tax administration. There were people who were seeing what kind of cars that you have, what should be the tax that should go on it. And yet the total collection was this, right? Now, why did this happen? We know from a lot of movies also, some of you would have seen this 2013 movie, Special 26, where these are con artists who pose as income tax officers. And a lot of that happened about checking the wealth of the people as well, right? So that just depicts search and seizure operations which used to happen and what was the result of it. So the major problem was, how do you value something, right? The tax officers are not equipped to value a nice painting that Amit has, or a nice book, collector's edition book that he might have. So essentially you had this situation where valuation was not possible, and whenever there is discretion, it leads to corruption, it leads to a whole lot of second order effects. So that was the first reason. Second, there was this agricultural loophole, because agriculture was not taxed. You had people diverting their wealth towards agriculture, right? Because you could park your wealth in the agricultural domain and say that this is not taxed. So you had a whole amount of a channel which was opened up because of this. And third one, we also know rental properties. You have property which people own or transfer it to someone else's name, etc. So essentially, any tax has three kind of costs, right? There are the cost of compliance. How easy is it for you to comply with it? The cost of administration. What does it cost the government to raise that money? And the third is market distortionary cost, right? The raising that tax, how much does it cause second order effects to the market in general? This kind of tax ranks poorly on all three costs, right? It is terrible at administration because you have valuation, you have to do that. It's very costly. You have to train tax officers on art appreciation to know how much does a good painting cost and things like that, right? It is bad on compliance because people valuing their assets, which are spread across different places, they might have some assets outside the country also. Valuation of this is a nightmare. So again, compliance cost is high, and there are distortionary costs because people will always either divert it to someone else or in areas like agriculture which are not taxed. So it is a terrible idea, but this idea keeps coming back. So whenever someone says that we should put a wealth tax, please remind them that we have tried this, and through public finance principles, it really doesn't make sense. So it was eventually abolished in 2015, but it keeps coming back. Now, second one is inheritance tax, right? This is called also estate duty. Now, this essentially is a tax on grief, right? So when a person dies, that money goes to someone else, their inheritors, so essentially their family, etc. And you have to pay a tax on that. Now, people justify it on the grounds of equality, that a person who inherits this income hasn't done much to inherit this, and hence they should be paying a huge amount of tax on this. So that is the idea. But it is a kind of double taxation, right? The person who is deceased has already paid tax while earning that kind of money, and then you are again taxing it just because that person has died, and now it is going to their family, right? So we have had this from 1953 until 1985. Again, there are absurd rules, right? So there was a threshold structure for this, that estate duty was 6,65,000 plus 85% of the estate value above rupees 20 lakh, right? Which means if you had about 20 lakh kind of wealth and you were paying a 85% estate value tax, right? So it's really punishing for someone who's inheriting this. So this was also eventually taken back because the money earned from this was pittance, didn't work again. So then someone thought, okay, both of these didn't work because another loophole for people was that people could transfer their wealth to someone else, right? So they could gift money to someone else. So that is what was gifting to their family or to their known relatives, etc. That was a way where people avoided this. So the government, in its infinite wisdom in 1958, also introduced the gift tax, and that was intended to stop people from dodging wealth and inheritance tax, right? So that began, and again, not much money was could be recovered. It was eventually abolished in 1998, and then finally the government revived it in a different form in 2004, which was a better way, where the government said that any gifts from non-relatives are simply treated as recipients' taxable income, and then when you do income tax filing, people would know that they have to declare that, right? So essentially there was no separate bureaucracy or machinery for that, which was there earlier to collect this. So all these are examples where taxes have been really bad examples. The last one which I want to add is the one which is even more commonplace: corporate tax itself, high corporate tax. Now, OECD 2018 study of really 94 countries showed that statutory corporate tax rate and dividend tax in India is one of the highest in the world, if not the highest amongst all the G20 countries surveyed. It is at 48.3%. This was in 2018, right? Imagine the deadweight loss with such a high tax rate. And that is one primary reason why any investor who's trying to find jurisdictions where they can invest money, start new economic activity, if the tax rate is this high, why will they pick India and not some other country where there are ample opportunities where tax rates are lower? Right? So this is really high. In fact, the gap between India's rate and the median G20 rate, according to the study, was 21 percent points. So that's the kind of gap. It's not even some small number. It's literally more than double. And that is the reason why a lot of investors will think twice before investing in India. It was partially fixed in 2019, where you had a budget corporate tax rate cut. And again, this leads to this perception that, tax rate has been cut, which means this money is going to the rich people and not to the others. But we know that tax on capital ends up being tax on labor, because if those corporates which could have potentially started in India don't invest in India, those jobs don't come to India, and they go to Vietnam, Thailand, or other places, right? And in fact, there is a lot of study as well. There is a study in Germany which said that for every 1 rupee additional tax on capital, the tax on wages is itself 0.6 euros, right? So that is also an analysis which was done, which confirms this idea that tax on capital is tax on labor as well. So eventually, we still have a very high tax rate for foreign companies. They still pay 40% plus if you include cesses and surcharges. So those are all the examples of bad taxes. But I also want to give an example of a good tax, right? So GST, for all its flaws, is again, we think that GST is a terrible idea, but I think essentially people often we have these memes, right? The GST on chocolate is different from GST on Kit Kat example, right? Is it a chocolate or is it a biscuit or things like that, right? Those are memes which suggest that this is ludicrous, right? It is ludicrous, but it was much more ludicrous before that. That's all I'm trying to say, because we've forgotten what the world was before GST. And let me try to give some examples of that as well. This is a case of finding the key under a lamppost, right? Because GST is now brought all that absurdity in one domain, we see it and we make fun of it. But earlier, the absurdity was much more, just that it was invisible, sort of, and that's why we didn't understand what a mess it was. But take this example. There is this famous Valayar or infamous Valayar check post between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Right? So here, essentially, if you search news reports before 2015, you will often find there are fights happening between the truck drivers who are stuck. Right? There were these entry points because the tax rates were different between Kerala and Tamil Nadu. You needed those infamous checkposts which were there at borders, right? And you used to see these huge queues of truckers waiting, cooking food on the roadside, etc. Right? So here on this checkpost, it was very common that for 4 or 5 days, trucks used to just wait, awaiting tax clearance from the inspectors. Right? And the funny part of this is, because of this kind of barrier, so essentially goods manufacturing happens in Tamil Nadu. There was a lot of goods being transferred to Kerala, and then through coastal areas like Kochi, etc., they used to be exported. Right? Now, because of this barrier, people eventually found it easier to move goods from Tamil Nadu to Colombo and then export it, rather than exporting it through a neighboring state, Kerala. So imagine the losses which happened. So all these were examples. You had this absurd idea where every firm had to build their warehouses in different cities, in different states, just to get around this central sales tax and to avoid paying that, essentially. And people would remember, even when they go from Delhi to Gurgaon, you see a huge number of these warehouses on the other side of the border, right? So all these were illustrations of how bad the system was earlier, right? So all of that eventually went away with the GST. Not to forget that the tax itself was bad. It was a tax on a tax. There were really compounding effects that were happening. But all of that has sort of reduced because of the GST. So that is the positive thing. And for all its flaws, it's at least an improvement over the status quo that existed before. So these are the examples I thought people should know before getting into a conversation on new taxes.
This is super helpful, but the overarching theme that I find, if I just completely zoom out and think about why do we have taxes, right? So a certain portion of the tax is to solve the collective action problem, right? Each person has an incentive to build things very nicely up to their front gate, right? But there isn't much incentive if it's voluntary to have upkeep of the street in front of you, or the chalk down the street, or, how to think about maintenance of the water pipe going under your house, right? So for instance, if someone is 80 years old, they're like, yeah, I'm going away in a few years or a couple of decades. Why should I spend on maintenance and a complete rehaul of the sewage system? Whereas someone who's 20 will hugely benefit from that. So for all these reasons, to solve a very local collective action problem is where we started getting these kinds of taxes, right? Now there are also non-local collective action problems, such as, the classic example of the public good is to provide defense, right? Or to solve certain kinds of externalities, or to have a certain kind of compliance regime or a legal system. Now, everyone benefits from contracts getting enforced, even if they are not party to the contract, but no one wants to pay for the contract getting enforced when they're not party to the contract, right? So this is the reason we originally got taxes. And then it seems like somewhere the motivation was not just how do we pay for collective action problems, or how do we solve the collective action problem and pay for that and public goods. It became a number of social questions and issues that needed to be solved, right? And the move from user fees and taxes, or collective goods kind of taxes, to the social evils, there's one more in the middle, which is, what you hinted at, which is let's squeeze people where it hurts the most. So you're less likely to have crazy taxes on chocolate, because typically chocolate has a lot of competition from other chocolates and also from jalebis and, other kinds of sweets you can make at home. But salt is very, very few substitutes. Right? So you see salt taxes pop up in all kinds of parts of the world, because the fewer substitutes you have, the more that, the example you gave of the 18% tax on 100 rupee chocolate. If the same thing is on salt, all 18 rupees will be paid by the consumer, because there are virtually no substitutes, right? So in this move between the how do we solve local problems and, collective action, to how do we solve every single social ill, right? We are worried about too much consumption of alcohol and cigarettes. We'll have a cess there, right? We want to make sure that every state has an upkeep of a particular kind of, state biodiversity or something. We'll have a cess for that. If we want to cure inequality, we're going to do it through a particular kind of tax. We want to treat farmers better than anyone else because they paid their dues in the 200 years of British rule. So now all their children should forever be exempt from tax, right? So this is like a very strange thing we have. And as a consequence of that is exactly what you pointed out, which is our taxes birth new taxes, which is if a Hindu undivided family needs to be protected, then we're going to have high corporate taxes on the firm and say Hindu undivided family is a separate tax unit, right? If people start gifting their estate because the estate tax is too high, we're going to have a gift tax. So something about also the symptoms you described and the malady is somehow converging, is how I think about it. And all of it is converging because we try to use tax as the core instrument that we use to cure everything, right? And that's another big part of the book, the way you talk about it, which is, should we use the tax code as a social engineering manual? So, one part of that answer is what you already gave, but what is the other part of the answer? Like, should we allow taxes to correct social ills, to correct externalities, to incentivize or nudge people not to engage in eating junk food or to smoke cigarettes or tobacco? Like, how should we think about that?
So yeah, I think it broadly, even about taxes, it also has to do with how do we think about the state itself, right? And there are so many different visions about it. You talk about Buchanan, and you've also met him. That's a different view of the state, right? Public choice theory, that you have to know incentives of people in the government, how that works. I think generally people have brought into this idea of the Musgravian state, right? That the state is generally a benevolent entity. So if there is more tax, it will go to something which is beneficial, is generally a lot of is an assumption which often which often goes wrong, but this is the default assumption in India, and that leads to a lot of these unquestioning increases in absurd taxes, right? Now, coming back to, is tax code a social engineering manual? Now, this is the 250 years of the wealth of nations, right? And there was an answer to taxes in that book itself, right? So it talks about the every tax good tax needs to have four parameters, right? So one is the principle of equity, that is some amount of fairness. People should pay in proportion to their ability. You don't want the burden. That's why, taxes on consumption, if they are very high, they generally are not a good idea, because they will pose an inordinate burden on people who might not be able to afford it. So that's why taxes on income, etc., are progressive, generally thought to be better off. The second principle is the idea of certainty. Right? A taxpayer should definitely know what, when, and how much do they owe. They should not be subject to arbitrary changes. So that's another important principle. The third one is it should be convenient to pay, right? So that's the compliance should be easy. You don't want to have to jump through hoops even for complying with the tax law. And finally, the law of economy, right, which means that the tax should not have distortionary effects which lead to many second order problems. So these are the four principles which were there 250 years ago, and they pretty much apply to most of the good taxes versus bad tax distinction. Even today, we can just use this as a framework. Now, with that in mind, there is a perception that we should use taxes beyond this to actually fix other things as well. Like we've had taxes for regional development, we've had a whole number of taxes for many other things, right? So a common perception that we have is tax system should not only collect money so that so that the government can spend it on fixing market failures or providing public goods, but there is a strong belief that tax rates itself should try to reduce inequality in one way or the other, right? And that's why there is high demand. Even in GST, you can see that there is a different kind of tax rate on whether your car is more than a particular cc, right? More than 1000 cc car will have a higher tax rate, less than 1000 cc car will have a different tax rate. So all these kinds of things end up making the tax system so complicated. There are a huge number of exemptions. When you file income taxes, you notice there are a huge list of exemptions that come in, again, because of the things that you mentioned. Some kind of activity needs to be incentivized, so the government has put some exemption on it, that you are waived off from paying taxes if you are doing this, right? So all that leads to making the tax system so complicated that you don't end up achieving the objective that you want. The principle of good taxation is these four principles that Adam Smith spoke about. And eventually, what you want is the tax system to generate most amount of money with less amount of coercion, right? That's the principle for from a government point of view. And once that is done, then you can do all your equality redistribution on the expenditure side, right? So you can use that money productively for providing public goods, for providing things which have positive externalities, but you don't want to bring that into the revenue raising part itself. But That again has a huge amount of people don't get this, so there is a huge amount of demand that the tax system, why is it that this particular car which is or let's say an SUV, why is this SUV having a particular tax rate? The tax rate on SUV should be 40%, tax rate on an Alto should be 20%. Those kinds of things, there is broad acceptance, and there is evidence for this. So in Chile, there is a study by Engel, Redarts, and Galetovic. This was a 1999 study which tried to look at the Chilean tax system, because they had this natural experiment where they tried to implement this kind of hugely progressive, quote unquote progressive tax system to reduce inequality. And what they found is that the Gini coefficient, which essentially measures inequality, that had no effect even though you had this kind of taxation. In fact, the Gini coefficient marginally increased after you had this kind of taxation. So taxing the rich to fix inequality experiments don't work. If you want to provide social engineering, or in a way, if you want to provide things which have positive externalities, or they have good effects, you want to do that on the expenditure side, please leave the tax system to follow these 4 principles which Adam Smith talks about.
Just to add to that, normally when we talk about these kinds of taxes, the social engineering taxes, there's a very classic like equity efficiency trade-off, right? Which is, if you're going to redistribute from the top income or, wealth owners of an economy to the bottom, then the people who are more wealthy or earn more income are usually able to escape those taxes more or find sort of ways around it. The government has to be extremely capable to actually do it well. And not every rupee that you take from the top will actually go to the bottom, right? And this tends to be a very, very classic trade-off in public finance. I would actually say that, to back up, as a consequence of this, equity efficiency trade-off, what we've started doing in India is this kind of GST social engineering, right? Which is everyone pays consumption tax. It's much easier to raise than wealth tax or, any other kind, income tax, for which we have a very, very small base and so on. So let's do our social engineering through GST. Right? Because now everyone has to have GST. And because GST is a fantastically, incentive compatible VAT, which is, it has these forward and backward linkages. Every single person in the supply chain has to actually give each other the credit. GST becomes much harder to escape. Okay, so far so good. Now the problem is, even within GST, what I find is 3-4 different kinds of effects. One is, of course, it's regressive, which you pointed out, right? Even someone who's a daily wage person or someone who's effectively begging and then buys a packet of Parle G with that is paying 18% GST. There's no escape to that. So as a fraction of their income or revenue, they pay a very high amount. But there are a couple of other complexities. One is, we sometimes just forget that we think of it as producer versus consumer, which is a very classic Marxist kind of setup, right? There is this big bad monopolist or capitalist who is the producer. And then there are the regular people or the poor people who are the consumers. And now we need to figure out, right, who are the people who are either producing these luxury goods for these luxury people or sin goods, which again, only rich people within this framework consume, or so on. Now, the problem is, they don't recognize that producers are actually of all shapes and sizes, right? You have someone who is producing things at a very, very small scale, right? 3-4 people. You have women who are running these tailoring shops or small boutiques, right? You have the famous example of the guy who has a food cart, or the redi wala, the pakoda wala, and things like that, right? But you also have the kirana wala. Everyone is not Reliance and Ambani. Now, the trouble with having a lot of rates and a lot of social engineering goals is, it is also regressive on the compliance side, not just on the consumption side, right? On the compliance side, whether you're a huge like Walmart or Amazon kind of big chain store, or whether you're a kirana wala, if you have 12-15 different GST rates, the kirana wala spends a much larger proportion of his revenue to comply with 120 different SKUs or items as the big supermarket that is run by Reliance. And so we don't think about the small producer when it comes to these kinds of taxes. So we think big bad corporate tax, and we think for everything else GST. All producers are Baniya community or upper caste, or if you're from the British Marxist view, then all big producers are like some kind of Charles Dickens capitalist. So I find that approach to be the fundamental problem, right? Which is why if you're eating barfi, you must be some simple person. If you're eating chocolate, you must be some fancy person who likes it, right? If you're eating imported chocolate, you must be an even fancier person. If you're driving a bigger car, like what if you're driving a bigger car because you have a larger family, which tends to happen with poorer people?
Yeah.
All else held equal. Or if you are the person who lives in a Hindu undivided family and there are 6-7 nephews and everyone needs to be, schlepped back and forth to school. Like we have no understanding of why someone might buy a particular vehicle or it. So I find that very baffling. So, one problem is, of course, social engineering, but our social engineering is also based on some caricature of a 19th century British novel. It has no semblance to modern day India of who are actually the people who are working on a small scale and who are the people who are working on a big scale. Do you find this recurring thing pop up when you're giving all of these examples?
Yeah, totally. And, there's a strange feeling that somehow tax rate is an indicator of how much we are trying to equalize society, right? Why is that? I mean, finally, the tax revenue is what matters, right? So even if a person has 10% tax rate, but their income is really high, so income is, let's say, 1,000, and there is a tax rate of 10%, he's paying 100 rupees. Whereas if you have a much smaller income and you put a very high amount of tax rate also, you will not get 100 rupees. Finally, you want high tax revenue, right? But there is an obsession that even tax rates should be imagined on the basis of this basket of consumption that the government thinks are the consumption basket of person who's in some part of India, which might not be the case.
Yeah, no, it's this part. So, I mean, some of it is just a data problem. Some of it is we don't have a broad-based basket problem. But some of it, even in developed countries, this is an issue. So, my favorite two distortive taxes that I have experienced in the developed world, which at that point were relatively poor, were the window tax and the frontage tax, right? So these are two fascinating taxes. So, one, they found that richer people have more windows, which, brings in more light and all of the other things that rich people like to enjoy. So they decided that instead of taxing anything else, a good proxy or a pulse for how rich you are is how many windows you have. So they'll have a window tax. Okay, this was in the 17th century. This was in 17th century England, and then it's spread to the rest of the UK. Of course, you have this in the Netherlands, right? So the Netherlands, you have a frontage tax because big homes or mansions were huge in the front, right? You looked majestic. And as a consequence of these two things, I mean, we'll throw in some pictures of what it did to the local architecture. What did rich people start doing? They started boarding up windows. And as a consequence of this, especially people on the margin of like middle class to upper middle class, or even rich people who had like servants living at home and things like that, they obviously boarded up the windows of the servants' rooms or the rooms where someone was doing laundry or cooking or something like that, and actually increased problems for poorer people. It increased tuberculosis. Like, just imagine how stupid this idea is and how stupid they were to implement it just because it's a tax that can't be easily dodged. And of course, people dodged it by, closing their windows. So it became a particular kind of architecture where you have windows which are completely bricked up or boarded up. And Amsterdam, of course, famously has those very narrow, tall townhomes. And this was a consequence of reducing frontage. So you have a really deep inside and it's a tiny matchbox rectangle kind of house, right? And this became a kind of architecture, but again, not enough natural light, right? Your entire way of living in a home changes if your rooms have to be thin and long as opposed to actually how your rooms need to be for a particular purpose. So no matter how hard we try, you're exactly right. The focus should be on increasing revenues and base. If you start doing these kinds of weird things, then you have second order, third order effects. Eventually, the effect is the fourth order effect of architecture. Like an entire cityscape changes, right? Because of the way that you've done this. What is your favorite distortive tax? Mine has to be the window and the frontage. But what's your favorite distortive tax in India? I must ask.
So many to choose from, right? I'm spoiled for choices. But, I mean, let me pick something which people can relate to. So, on streets of Bangalore or Pune, it is very common for people to find uh, buses which are registered in Arunachal Pradesh or Nagaland. And you can see those registration numbers, and you'll wonder, like, why is it that there is a bus with this registration number, right? And again, the story is one of taxes. So it's a road tax arbitrage. So road tax didn't come under GST. Any person who runs these kinds of buses, they have to pay a bunch of taxes, right? First, to register the bus itself. Second, they need to pay a road tax on a per seat basis, and that is different across different states. So these states in the northeast, they obviously, they for them, if the buses are registered there because their economies are smaller, this can be a good revenue source. So they have really low tax rates on road tax rates, whereas other states have very high tax rates. So eventually what happens is most of the buses get registered there. They pay the road tax there, and the fitness certificate, which is supposed to be obtained in the state where they operate, that is always easy to game. So people just make those fake certificates, and that's why you've had some of these terrible tragedies also, right? There are fitness certificates are just fudged, and because of that, you had private buses having fire incidents. No one is actually doing the fitness certificates because they are eventually the only reason why those buses have been registered in some other place is because of this tax arbitrage, right? So that's one example which I think many people can relate to. But the example that you mentioned, we did talk about it in the book, but there's a great book on this called Rebellion, Rascals and Revenue. It's one of my favorite books on this topics because it has just catalogued all these absurd taxes across the world, especially in the West as well. And it's written by two economists, Keene and Slemrod. So that's quite a fun one. And the one interesting idea there is, which we wrote in the book as well, is how the Boston Tea Party itself, it comes from this book, Rebellion, Rascals and Revenue, was caused by a tax cut, not by a tax hike, which again is surprising, that a tax cut reduced the opportunities that a lot of the smuggling which was going on of tea from London to the colonies, and those people revolted because of this tax cut, because now legitimate tea could flow from India to London and then to the colonies, and this the smugglers and the black marketeers didn't like, and hence they did revolt, right? And that was one of the reasons why it eventually boiled and resulted in a bigger rebellion. But that was something interesting that very few people would realize.
Boiled into a rebellion is great description of Boston Tea Party.
And at this point, can I come in with a couple of limericks? You know, while you guys were
Yes,
talking,
please.
viewers might have noticed that, oh, Amit is looking down and he's not really paying attention. I'm paying attention. And I have put my poetic talents to good use to come up with limericks. Limericks, and I've written an old column about this, are not just about a rhyme scheme of AABBA, but also a syllable scheme of 99669. Considerable talent is required. So my first one is about our young friend Pranay. Once there was a man from Bangalore who got angry and started to roar. When his friends asked him why, he said, I cannot lie. I can't tolerate this theft anymore. Then I
This
have
is
one for
wonderful.
yeah. Then I have one for Shruti, which
This
takes
should have
into
been the
account.
blurb on the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one more for Pranay, but before that, one more from Shruti, which takes the road tax into account. So while Pranay was talking about it, I incorporated his road tax into a limerick. Once there was a girl from Mercatus. One day she kicked up a mighty fuss. She said, "I'm so bereft, I can take no more theft. Which state will I go to with my bus?" And and one more for our friend Pranay. This could also be a blurb. Once there was a man from Bangalore whose wife asked him, "Who do you abhor?" He replied with a grunt, "Darling, I must be blunt. I hate the tax man. He is a chore."
Yeah. Wow, wow.
So
Though he loves the
continue.
song.
Yeah,
He
that
loves
is a
he loves
Beatles
the song. No, yeah, well done. So anyway, sorry. So I had to
There's a Beatle reference in Pranay's book. That's it. Like, we are all very, very thrilled at this point.
Yeah, so this is one of those, what do you call it? You have those Bollywood films, there's great sentiment, there's great drama, there's great madness. And then Asrani or someone will come and or Mahmood will come and do a comic act, and then he will disappear. So that was me. Continue.
Cameo.
Cameo.
Yes.
Special appearance. So, it's just to pick up on the last point, Pranay, where you were talking about buses. Now, the place again, like, you talked about how I knew Buchanan, which it's like, Buchanan and Wagner wrote these fantastic books on public finance. And you started initially with how the way we navigate these questions of tax is also us navigating through what is the role of the state, right? And if there's something I've learned which is really a George Mason public finance point of view, or the Virginia Public Finance School, from both Buchanan and Wagner, is public finance and constitutional choice and public choice are all deeply interlinked. Because how you think about the state depends entirely on how you fund the state. Do you fund it through a particular kind of income tax or a consumption tax or a wealth tax, or not taxes, but actually debt, right? And deficits versus what the state actually does. So the more number of things that you want the state to do, the more rope you give them to increase the number of taxes or to increase their expenditure and deficits, which you pay through the loss of the value of your money or through debts which your future generations will pay, right? These are really only the three mechanisms that we have. And I see that most deeply in the connection that you just gave, which is about public transport, right? What do we need from our cities? What we expect from our cities is like, basic law and order. The garbage gets picked up, right? The roads are clean and don't have potholes. You don't have, pedestrians who are walking and suddenly disappear into a manhole. I feel like I'm reading a story like that every 6 days. I don't know if the algorithm is messing with me, but this is happening a little too often in India. Even simpler things like just having street lighting, so that places are not so dark, you don't have as many muggings or as many crimes. So these are our basic expectations from the state. Now, the next layer expectation is it would be good to have a transportation service, which is what you were talking about. Those buses shouldn't catch on fire when we're actually traveling in that bus, or the bus driver shouldn't be drunk. That's as low as an expectation gets when it comes to public transport. The next layer of that might be, it'd be good if they can provide schools, if we can pay for colleges so that, poorer people don't have to, pay for private schooling or private college and so on. And then you can layer these things one on top of the other. But virtually every single person that we meet, no matter which Indian city or state you live in, this is really the lowest expectation we have, right? You don't want to live in a dirty environment. You don't want to live in a very polluted environment. You don't want to live in a hazardous environment where you're constantly dodging cars and falling into manholes and getting hit by buses. Right? What I find is that's the one thing that is missing the most in what we have, right? So what can you tell us from the book about the Indian state is collecting so much in tax? It is so regressive that even homeless people and beggars are paying 18% GST. And yet we can't provide any of the most basic things that we have virtually unanimous agreement that everyone wants in the city.
Yeah, so that gets us to cities, right? And that's another major problem in our public finance system. There's a statement that I had read first in Devesh Kapoor's paper about why does the Indian state both fail and succeed, and it was like every development story is also a fiscal story, right? So all those things can be are connected to public finance. And especially in Indian cities, this is even more relevant because Indian cities roughly generate around 60% of our GDP, but the total self generated revenue of all municipal corporations in India is just 0.4% of the GDP. Right? So 60% is the total um, economic activity they are creating of India, and it's just 0.4% is the revenue they are generating. So you can imagine the mismatch, right? And that's really essential fiscal story behind the developmental problems that you mentioned. And this is really the way we've conceptualized city governance, which is again so ironical because while writing this chapter, we were looking at all our leaders in the freedom movement had lot of connections with the cities, right? Nehru, then Sardar Patel, Netaji Bose was in the Calcutta Municipal Corporation in multiple roles for around 16 years. So all of these people had deep connections and they had risen through city politics. But that's the level of government which doesn't exist really in India, even today. So we talk about three ideas in decentralizations: fund, functions, and functionaries. All three are broken, but where it is broken the most is really the funds, right? So fund, functions, functionaries essentially means that you need to have first, when you're thinking about decentralizations, you first need to have clarity about the functions that a level of government has to do. Then you need to have functionaries, people who will make that happen, and then you need to give them money to make that happen. But even when we gave this constitutional recognition to city governments in the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, none of those responsibilities which we gave to the city governments had a compulsory item on raising revenue. So it's to the discretion of the state governments whether they want to allow property tax to go to the city governments directly or not. Some state governments have still not done this, but most state governments have eventually given property taxes to the city governments. The net result is, as we discussed, it's just 0.4% of the GDP is with the city governments. And that's the real problem. And this we explain through the Vixelian connection, right? So this is a famous public finance framework which talks about the level of public service provision is best when there is maximum overlap between three circles. Imagine a Venn diagram, which you can see on the screen. So the the more the overlap between those who benefit, those who decide, and those who pay, the better the public service provision will be. But here we see that in the Indian city structure, the overlap is marginal, right? You are paying income tax, which goes to the union government, then through a formula, it is shared with your state government. And in the GST now, there is no provision also for the state government to necessarily share that with your city government, right? You have a SGST and you have a CGST. You don't have a local GST, right? Within that rate itself, you don't want another increased rate, but within that rate, you don't have any defined component. So it is for the state governments to decide how much of it is shared and how much of it isn't. There is no predictability at the level of the city governments, so they are not able to plan for taking some of those basic public infrastructural works that you mentioned. So this is the real issue. So we have another framework that you can see on the screen now about the dimensions of decentralization. So there is political decentralization, there's administrative decentralization, there's fiscal decentralization. These are the three dimensions. And when we try to map all the cities in terms of these three, we've done reasonably well on administrative decentralization, in the sense that there are city level administrative units now, whether it is for water or electricity, public transport, etc. There is some amount of political decentralization also, that elections have to be conducted. Although they don't often happen. For example, in my city, we haven't had city elections for 10 years now. and they just keep getting postponed. But still there is a structure that this should happen in many cities. It does happen. So you have done marginally well on political decentralization, but it's the fiscal dimension which is the weakest, because the city governments really don't have any fiscal powers. And we see that even property taxes, which in states where it has been allocated to city governments, their property tax collections are really poor. There was a study in economic survey around 7-8 years ago, where even in a city like Bangalore, which does well in terms of land records, etc., the tax collection is 13% of the overall property tax potential. Just 13%, right? In a city like Bangalore, you can imagine how bad it will be in some other cities as well. So this is the real issue why our cities are the way they are. Just one more point I wanted to add, and this is my favorite stat always, that even in a country like China, which is so centralized, 51% of government spending happens at the sub-provincial levels, right? So 51% of their total government spending is not being done by Xi Jinping. It is done by the mayors of their 300 plus cities. Whereas in India, that number is roughly 3%. Right? So you can imagine that China is more decentralized than India is in reality in terms of the fiscal dimension, and we aren't. So we can think of ourselves as a federal country, but the decentralization element is not there on the ground, at least fiscally.
You know, the great Raja Chalaiya, who's actually chaired a lot of these committees on taxes and is responsible for bringing some sanity to our tax system, because as Pranay, you said, it's a lot worse. It was a lot worse. So he used to say that every government wants devolution and decentralization up to their level. And that's it, and no more, right? And that's exactly what we have going on. And the 73rd and 74th Amendment really botched things up. But you know, this Vixelian Venn diagram that you talked about, I just want to zero in on that, right? The way you set up the diagram is a little bit more in the abstract, because that's how Wixel describes it. But the more concrete version of that is, you want your residents, your voters, and your taxpayers to be the same people, because that's the maximum feedback mechanism, right? That's exactly what gets you that in between little triangle in the overall Venn diagram that Wixel gives you. And we see this every day. Like, look at what rich people are exiting into, right? What do they exit into? They exit into gated communities and fancy apartment buildings. And these are apartment buildings where basically the people who decide, the people who live, and the people who pay are all the connection between them is extremely tight. The people who decide are chosen from the people who live, and the people who live and the people who pay are identical, right? And this is where you get the most amenities that people want. So if you're in a very, very posh development, you'll get more, tennis courts, and you'll also get some unsavory things like service elevators and separate elevators for maids and staff. And so, it can go both ways. Like sometimes what people want can be also quite distasteful. In slightly more middle class places, you'll see these very nice, cute golf cart or buggies that take children from the apartment building up to the school bus stop. So, that's my favorite thing to see every morning, right? Like in these big apartment complexes, like all these kids.
That. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, in Delhi, in Noida, Gurgaon, I see this a fair bit, right? So it's like a bit of a schlep to the front gate of the gated community. And, all these little kids with their water bottle and their backpacks are being transported in this buggy, and parents are running after some forgotten lunchbox or something. And you also see this in the work on slums, right? There are slum lords, right, who are basically leaders within a slum community. And they are also collecting user fees and, or chanda, which is getting collected. And it is being spent on the things that people want the most, right? And it is impossible for them to build sewage systems and things like that. But a lot of people in slums, what do they need most? They need to be more legible to the state. They need some paperwork, right? They need to figure out a ration card. And you see that the slum leaders provide exactly that service, that people who are migrants and are coming from another city and don't have paperwork and need their kids to get admission to a local school, all those things get provided, right? So this Vixelian Venn diagram is something we see all around us all the time. Those of our friends who don't live in posh communities but who work in a great corporate office, look at every industrial park, right? It's basically internalized all these collective action problems and public goods and services, right? Your Infosys campus is going to have like beautiful greenery, but it's also going to have its own garbage disposal system. It's going to have its own water filtration system. Most of them generate their own electricity and so on and so forth. So we see this happening all the time. And the greatest example of that is the city of Jamshedpur, right? Which was basically internalizing a particular kind of problem and providing all these services for their employees who were also their residents, because they basically built an iron and steel plant in the middle of nowhere. And eventually, as that community started growing, you started providing it to the entire city. And it's the most well-run city when it comes to public goods and utilities, right? So don't get thrown off by the Vixelian idea that it is necessarily like a Scandinavian economist from 100 years ago, and therefore those ideas are irrelevant to us. There are many Scandinavian ideas that are irrelevant to us, but this particular idea in its abstract, we may not fully appreciate, but when we actually dig into what Wixel is saying and what Buchanan said, what Wagner said, the most work on this actually has been done by Vincent and Eleanor Ostrom, right? Which is this overlap between the people who are providing the service, the people who are voting for the service, and the people who are paying for the service. The tighter that linkage or that connection, the better it is, which is why we keep talking about how we need more local goods and services provision, which you were talking about. Even the great Chinese behemoth, actually provides all these things at the local level, which is where you have the tightest connections. It's not the CCP which is paying for it. But in India, we actually try to pay for these things with centrally sponsored schemes. So Pranay, I hate like kicking each hornet's nest, but that's how detailed your book is. Can you walk us through like what is this obsession we have with centrally sponsored schemes? I don't even want to guess how many we have at this point. I got some of that documentation from your book. But what is our obsession with these schemes, and what does it actually do to our overall public finance structure and how distortive it's become?
Yeah. So, by the way, even in China, the spending is happening by CCP itself at all levels, and yet it is decentralized, right? So that is the one thing. Yeah. So let's
many branches of the single party.
Yeah. So let's come to the centrally sponsored schemes, right? So this is a word which gets thrown around a lot because there are many centrally sponsored schemes. But just think about this, that in India, we have prime ministers inaugurating flyovers, right? We have the chief ministers of a state which has 6 crore population talking in his budget, because he was also the finance minister, about how we should have one flyover on one particular road in Bangalore, right? It was just one small flyover over a traffic intersection, right? But it made it to his budget speech of a rich state which has a 6 crore population. So we see this weird situation where every level of government is trying to do the work of the government level which is below it, right? That's what you mentioned about Raja Chalaya's pithy statement as well. So the way it manifests at the union level is through this idea of centrally sponsored schemes, where essentially what these union government runs two kinds of tied transfers, which is tied to a particular purpose. So that's why they are called tied transfers, and one is central sector schemes, right? So a lot of things that the union government does through railways, for example, is a central sector scheme, say modernization of railways, because this is designed at the union government level and it is also executed at the union government level. So union ministry is executing it. But centrally sponsored schemes are ones which are designed at a union government ministry, but they are executed at by the state governments. In one of the previous episodes, we talked about why is there even a need for a Ministry of Education, right, at the union government level, because it was supposed to be a state government subject in the constitutional design, but we still have a union ministry, and once you have a ministry, the ministry has to do something, right, and the ministry has to prove that it can impact citizens. Whether the constitution has given that responsibility doesn't matter. We should have a role to play, and that's how you have a plethora of centrally sponsored schemes which started. And you would think, why are the state governments not protesting it? There is no petition by a state government saying, why is the union government running health, national rural health mission, when health is still public health is still a state subject, right, according to the constitution. But state governments also don't protest because they get a part of the spending from the union government for these schemes. So that's why it is called centrally sponsored schemes. So they are designed by the Ministry of Health for, they would be sponsored, say a 60-40 ratio. So some amount of money will come from the union government and the state governments have to put a little bit of more money from their side. So it's a nice gravy train which works for the state governments. It works for the union governments because the prime ministers can go and say that they are not just doing big stuff like defense or foreign policy, but they are also providing water to your city and electricity, and the public health center is also done by the union government, and you can have a photo of our prime ministers on it, right? So all those things flow from this idea of centrally sponsored schemes. So they started small, and as you would imagine, you had many hundreds of centrally sponsored schemes which increased, and the whole problem was that because they are designed by different ministries, they don't even have a fixed outcome that you want to come from them, right? So the way they are designed just depends on the ministry. Many times they are disconnected from the outcome. For example, let's take the narrow example of public health, let's say dengue prevention, and you have a centrally sponsored scheme for that. Ideally, you would want it more money to go in a place where there are much more dengue cases, such that you can quickly close that gap, because this is one thing which has negative externalities, right? There is no it can flow from one state to the other. There can be a transmission for a bunch of these public health disorders. So you want this to be contained very quickly, and especially the states where there is much more prevalence of this, you want to support it more. But that's not what happens in these centrally sponsored schemes. In fact, most of the centrally sponsored schemes get gamed, and they go to states which do the paperwork better, or are able to say that we've spent our money that we got, so please give us more money, which will be the states which have more capacity, right? And eventually you have we did this analysis on health, and we found that centrally sponsored schemes for health are actually regressive. We did this study where infant mortality rate is generally a good measure for a whole bunch of health interventions, and you would think that health spending is more in places where infant mortality rate is higher, but that's not how it happens. In fact, on a per capita basis, it's exactly the opposite. So this is the condition of centrally sponsored schemes, but centrally sponsored schemes over time have increased. Now they have been lumped together in some umbrella schemes. In 2017, there was finally a realization that there are way too many of them, so they wanted to rationalize it. But that rationalization is still not complete. So you have a bunch of umbrella schemes which are just renamed packaging of old schemes, but there are still way too many of them. So I have argued earlier for Pragati, when Amit used to edit it, that there should be no more than 10 centrally sponsored schemes. You can think of health, education. There are a bunch of other areas that you can pick. But beyond that, you don't need them. But right now we have 30, and if you unroll them, they become more than 100, right? And these are not serving the purpose that they are meant to. Neither are they designed well. But that's what we have, and we don't question them, right? So people just think that, yeah, what drinking water mission, yes, the PM should announce it and the union government should have, but they are not working, and we should really question whenever you see a new centrally sponsored scheme coming up.
In fact, we even have an episode of The Seen and the Unseen on exactly this centrally sponsored schemes. And this was like, I think, 9 years ago or 10 years ago. And still so little has changed. I wish more people listen to the show.
Yeah, and on the centrally sponsored scheme part, I feel like we are trapped in this weird spiral in India, right? We inherited a very highly centralized fiscal system. It became even more centralized because of central planning, and then there is really no choice. And now there have been various efforts since the 90s to start decentralizing that. However, to decentralize the fiscal system, you need a lower or a subnational or a sub-state government that can actually absorb that money, right? And now the lament is, oh, they don't have any ability to spend. They have no capacity to spend. We can give them the funds, but the functions and the functionaries are either not devolved or they don't know what to do. And I think it's like another 30 years will pass, because until you get the funds, there is no way you can develop the capacity. Right? So how long are we going to lament the fact that there are going to be gram panchayats and cities in Bihar that lack the state capacity? I mean, unless we let them build their state capacity, they're forever going to lack their state capacity. Right? Everyone built their state capacity somewhere. Even the Scandinavian countries were not like, it didn't come with the big bang of the universe. Okay. They developed their state capacity somewhere along the way. And it has to be the same thing. So we are now in this weird situation where we're like, oh, these local governments don't have state capacity to provide clean drinking water. So we will do this at the central level. And then we will force them and say, oh, you can only get funds for electrification or for water pipes or for bathrooms or for a housing program or something new and crazy. And it's like, as long as we keep doing this, they're never going to be able to develop their capacity. You can only develop it when you develop the revenue raising and the revenue spending capacity simultaneously. So now all our money goes to the union government, and then it all comes back for state subjects. Health, education, all of these are state level subjects, and rightfully so, right? So this is a very strange paradox of India, where something doesn't work, we're like, oh, it doesn't work, so someone further up will solve it. But the person further up solving it is going to ensure that it never works in the first place. So I don't know how to get out of this, Pranay. This is not a question as much as a lament. But what is a good way to think about this?
Yeah, so a good way to think about it is about the idea of fiscal federalism itself, right? So we can come to the next part, and which was another idea that we wanted to explore. Like you rightly said, preferences vary across different states, so and you want and across different cities and villages, so you want them to have more fiscal powers, right? So the way to do this would be to increase their fiscal powers. And currently what is happening is a lot of the debate in India about money going to a particular state or a city is thought of from this zero sum mentality, right? That this state gets more money, and why does my state does not get more money, right? So there's this contestation over the horizontal imbalance, right? Whereas my state against some other state. Whereas what is really happening is that it is the union government which has spread its wings too far, and that's where the real challenge is. So that's what is called a vertical imbalance. That is the money shared between a higher level of government and the lower levels of government is called a vertical balance or imbalance, and the money shared between levels of government which are at the same level, let's say across states, is called the horizontal balance. So whenever this new finance commission report comes, there's so much talk about how much money goes to my state versus some other state. Whereas the real question is about the vertical imbalance, because most of the spending, the social infrastructure, the constitutional design is supposed to happen at the state level. So states spend 68% nearly of the total government spending, but they only raise 38% of their revenues. Right? So they are again dependent on higher level authority, which is the union government. In fact, the current PM, when he was the CM, he himself had mentioned that we should actually have 50% of the total revenue going to the state governments. And that was when he was the CM. But that has not happened later once he became the PM, right? So this is again something which is a real challenge. So we've tried to create a framework in this book, try to explain about how do we get out of this. So our proposals was like thought of a flow chart, which you can see on the screen. And the idea there was, this is really the example of the monkey and the two cats fable, right? It's where the two cats are fighting over a piece of chapati or something, and it's the monkey who says, I will help you do this, and he breaks the chapati into two unequal halves, says, okay, this is a bit unequal, let me eat the part which is slightly on the higher side, and then he keeps doing that over and over again, and it's the monkey who benefits at the cost of the two cats. That's the thing which is happening here, where union government is spending a lot more even on subjects which are in the state list, which are in the concurrent list, which were brought into the concurrent list, and it's the states which have not been able to spend. So what we would recommend is that, first choice, if possible, the union government should increase vertical devolution to 50%. Currently, it's around 41% of the divisible pool. So it should try increase. It can't happen suddenly because union government also has lots of responsibility. So can you think about a 10-year runway where this money goes directly to the state governments, right? And this is untied money. This is money which goes constitutionally to states, and then they can decide where they want to spend. So Kerala's spending priorities will be very different from Bihar's, right? So it should be left to the state governments to decide. So this kind of devolution would be really good. And to make this go to the third level of government, we can probably have a condition that if this increase happens to state governments, they should commit proportional increase or devolution to the city governments and rural governments as well, right? So it's that we are not just making the state governments more powerful at the expense of the local governments, right? So this is what would be the first choice. But we realize that this might not happen always if this is not politically feasible. The second option would be that at least the cesses and surcharges. So cess and surcharges are again one kind of tax. They're really bad taxes because a bunch of reasons. We'll not discuss them now, but one primary reason is that they are union governments or any level of government can raise this, and they are not required to necessarily share it with lower level governments. So we've seen over the years that when the 14th Finance Commission said that you should share a higher percentage of the taxes with your lower level of governments, eventually the union government just bypassed this spirit of the 14th Finance Commission by increasing cesses and surcharges. That's why your petrol rates, the excise duties, etc., have been very high, and there are cesses and surcharges on. First, there was an education cess, Swachh Bharat cess, a whole bunch of things which were invented so that the union government's pool of money doesn't reduce. So, if the 50% devolution is not possible, at least bring these cesses and surcharges into the pool of money which is shared with lower level of governments, right? That's a huge number, more than 5 lakh crore right now. So that is the second option. Even if that is not possible, then at least shrink the centrally sponsored schemes to a few areas, not more than 5 or 10 that we discussed, probably education, health, Even rural employment guarantee is fine because it's become a sort of norm now. So, okay, we just have a few of them and give the rest of the money to the state governments and let them decide their priorities according to their demands and preferences. If even that is not possible, the last choice is at least share the union government's non-tax revenue with lower level governments, right? Because there are huge amount of dividends RBI gives to union governments. Again, they go directly into the union government budget. So those could be shared with local governments, right? So this is sort of a flowchart that we thought offers multiple options to union governments if they are serious about improving local public provisions. It cannot happen by having one great scheme designed in Delhi and being implemented in various cities. So that's our recommendation.
Well, I really hope they follow this recommendation. And I would go for, I mean, I know you've given a staggered set of choices because that's what we do as public policy folks. It's like here is a bouquet of options, each one specifying the kind of trade off you have. But hopefully, eventually we need to have the municipal governments doing most of the work and most of the spending, and the national government's doing very, very little, and the state government's providing the intermediate services, which every village may not be large enough to provide an excellent schooling system, or the more advanced like STEM courses or vocational courses. Like there is room for the state government to actually provide a number of goods which are both public goods and also welfare expenditure. But we've kind of distorted everything. I have written about this before. I say that the Indian state is the upside down state, right? It provides all private goods like free LPG, all these sorts of things, like free toilet. The toilet can be bought in the store, right? What can't be easily produced individually or privately is the sewage system that the toilet is connected to, or the pipes of the water system, or the broader infrastructure of a city, and that the government simply doesn't provide, and everything else ends up getting provided by this state. And of course, the most extreme version of that is a number of strange freebies that are given to highly targeted groups. But we just have to, at some level, as you say, fix this upside down state, right? State provides public goods, solve collective action problems, helps us resolve externalities, and everything else we either resolve, leave it to the private market or the very lowest level of government as we can.
Yeah, and this is again outside the domain of public finance, actually, because this is again how we think about the state itself, right? And that still we still need to change our mind on that, which hasn't happened even despite the government and the ministers. When they were CM, they were saying something else, but it doesn't map when they have the power.
No, absolutely. The incentives of this are, all over the place. Like, not just the incentives that you have, which are distorted when you take someone else's money and give it to someone else, but the incentives of where you sit, right? Like Raja Chalaya said, you want evolution up to your level. So it is not surprising that the Prime Minister suddenly changes their mind when they move from Chief Minister to Prime Minister. Unfortunately, we don't have too many Prime Ministers who become Chief Ministers.
Yeah, that would be.
So, So Pranay came up with the very poetic words, the current PM when he was CM. So instantly as I heard that, I wrote a limerick. So here it goes. This hypocrisy should bother you. The centre runs the show through and through. Though the current PM, when he was CM, had taken quite the opposite view.
Wow.
And
Wah, Irshad.
Thank you. And there's one more I wrote a while before that, which cunningly brings in the book name as well. One day Pranay told us a fable. Shruti also shared a table. But if I may be frank, Amit was quite blank. He blamed his HDMI cable. Anyway,
this whole time when Amit was looking down and writing, I thought he's taking notes. And I was like, wow, like I have taught public finance, but I have never had students in my class taking notes like this. And then I realized, like the students in my class, he's writing limericks, just better quality than the students in my class.
No, no, I'm sure the students in your class are quite awesome too.
No, they pay me well, so it's totally fine one way or another. I get paid whether this is my favorite thing I used to say when I was still teaching. I don't do much of that anymore. I used to walk into the class and I used to tell the students, I already know this material and you are paying me to teach you. So at the end of the semester, if you learn nothing, I still know all of this material and I still get paid. That has some lessons for public finance also, like who pays whom for what is the underlying theme or the overarching theme. But Pranay, thank you so much for writing this book and for launching it here on our wonderful show and for telling us in detail. Huge congratulations to both you and Sarthak. Yeah, I've read the book. It is so readable. It has all the big concepts from all major traditions of public finance, very, very accessibly boiled down and applied to the Indian state. So it is, I think, a must read for everyone, whether you're a policy wonk or whether you just live in India and you pay taxes, which is every single person. I think it's a must read, and I'm so thrilled we got to do this.
Thank you. Okay, we are back to the section where we make a fool of ourselves, which is the infinite game. And I was supposed to conduct it this time, but I chickened out because I blabbered a lot in this episode about the book. So Amit has kindly agreed to conduct it this time. So Amit, over to you. What have
So
you brought for us?
I'm going to conduct it this time, and because I'm desperate to win also, next week Pranay will conduct it and I will see if I can beat Shruti. The problem is Shruti is the one who is tough to beat. So, yeah, anyway. So,
No, I think you guys have just picked too much Bollywood. Like, if you picked anything pragmatic like geography and all, I'll be total fail.
All right. On that note, the question today is a geography question,
What?
but not quite.
Oh my God.
It's also a nation state question. The question is, I want you to name all the countries that existed in 1945 and no longer do. So basically, the countries that ceased to exist since 1945. There are 25 of them. My estimate is that you should easily be able to get to 8, 9, 10, but after that, it starts getting dicey. But yeah, so
I
countries.
have a fundamental question.
Yes.
Is it stuff like British India, which is now like a bunch of things stitched together, or like what is the way to, like, how are you thinking about this? Or it's like not colonies?
No, it's not colonies simply because colonies weren't a separate country. British India wasn't a separate country; it was part of Great Britain. So therefore, it's not.
Okay, got it.
It's not British India, and so on and so forth. Also, it's not name
Can't even think of
changes.
one.
So it's not name changes. So Ceylon becoming Sri Lanka doesn't qualify. That's only a name change. And there are 7 or 8 countries which were not actually recognized by everyone or partially recognized. So if you come up with any of them, I won't give you a strike, but nor will I consider it a correct answer. You'll still have to guess. But actually, they're so vague, I don't think any of you will come up with any of them. And 2 strikes each, 2 strikes and you're out. So who wants to go first?
I want to go not at all. I can't think of one.
What do you mean you can't think of one?
I can't even think of like one country that
What?
comes to mind.
That is simply not possible.
Okay, let me begin.
Okay, begin.
Okay. USSR.
Correct. USSR is one of them. It's gone.
This is going to take some time.
Shruti, if you just think Eastern Bloc, वो 4-5 तो वहीं आ जाएंगे.
But I don't know which ones existed in 1945 and which ones didn't exist after.
You don't have to name a new country. You have to name the old one which is no longer there.
I will be equally bad at both.
No, come on. You must have been to some of these places.
You're just going to embarrass me more and more.
Dude.
Yeah. Come on.
You can't get... Come on. You can't get out at one.
Okay, let's give a hint.
Let's say Rhodesia.
Okay, I'll give you Rhodesia. I'll give you Rhodesia. It is... I mean, there are different ways of looking at it, but I will give you Rhodesia. Well done. You actually took a slightly tougher one. But Pranay, back to you.
Czechoslovakia.
Brilliant. So, well done.
Oh, okay. Then Yugoslavia.
Correct. And there is a trick here. Which Yugoslavia?
Well, so the Yugoslavia that split into Croatia. Like the Balkans, right? What was the split? Croatia,
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll make it easy.
Montenegro,
Okay,
Bosnia.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the thing. Yugoslavia would have worked as an answer three times. There was a Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, then there was
Acha,
a
वैसे.
Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and then there was Serbia and Montenegro. So they actually ceased to exist three times, as it were, as they got smaller and smaller. But, rather than complicate matters, and I don't expect anyone to say Yugoslavia again, you get Yugoslavia. So it's
Okay, not bad.
on you, Pranay.
East Germany.
Excellently well done. East Germany is correct.
Bosnia and Herzegovina, however you say that.
That exists.
I mean, it came under the Yugoslavias. I won't cut a
Oh,
point.
so that's one of the Yugoslavias. Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's done.
Okay, let me. Okay, then it's done. Let me just rework because you have three Yugoslavias. A country that existed in 1945 that doesn't exist today.
Pranay's written 4-5 down.
No. I'm not.
6-7 now.
So wait, you already said Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
We've done Yugoslavia. There's got to be one more block in there.
Do you want a clue?
Yeah.
Does Pranay mind if I give you a clue?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, think of guerrilla warfare. Late 1960s. American involvement.
That is so many places.
Yeah, but combine these three. Guerrilla warfare, late 1960s, American involvement.
Wait, what? Guerrilla warfare? So this is one of the Latin American countries.
No. Asia.
No. Oh,
Where was
Vietnam.
America?
Viet Cong.
Give me the name of the country which no longer exists.
My geography is really coming through.
Think cardinal directions.
Yeah.
Oh,
Dude.
North and South Korea. Korea.
कोरिया कहाँ चले गए?
हो गया
Meaning as in undivided Korea doesn't exist anymore and existed in 1945. If he can say East Germany, why can't I say Korea? Hello.
Okay. Weirdly, Korea is not in my list, so I'm just going to.
Yes, it's a bad list because it was there in 1945 and then it split into two separate countries after that.
Did it not split
Post Civil
before?
War.
You have.
Yeah.
No, it
So
split before, if I'm
1940
not mistaken.
1948 is Korean independence, South Korean independence, 15th August.
Can
19?
I look up Korea?
Yeah, I'm looking up Korea right now.
Let's look at undivided Korea. Korea undivided. Actually,
Establishment history.
2nd September 1945.
Correct.
So it's
Is the
really on the borderline.
surrender of Japan. So you win. It's not in my list. It's a fault of my list.
Yeah,
But
so I'm just saying it existed and then the second half it didn't exist. So
you
fair
just
enough.
you
Okay.
just about survived. But my clue wasn't for this, oddly enough. Anyway, continue.
Okay. Pranay?
North Vietnam.
Correct.
Okay.
At which point, Shruti,
That's me
one
again.
more should follow from there, but never mind.
I'm baffled.
I said North Vietnam.
South Vietnam.
Yeah.
Correct. Well done. We are all proud of you. Okay.
Okay.
There is.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of better things than that and nothing is really coming to mind.
But it is an answer. It is.
It is,
yeah,
anyway,
Yeah,
it
it's an
is-
answer. It keeps me alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sudan. I mean,
ding 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 ding.
because
ding.
Sudan is now split into two. So there was South.
Yeah,
there
but
is
when
now
did that
South-
happen?
When did that happen?
Recently. Earlier there was a Sudan and now there is.
You
two
know what?
Sudans.
So Sudan is not in my freaking list, but what you say makes sense. So I will check it. Over here, Sudan, officially the Republic of the Sudan. Wait a second. So Sudan got independence in 1956, which doesn't count, and South Sudan seceded in 2011, but Sudan still exists, right?
Yeah.
So
it
yeah.
but it
So
doesn't
it's-
exist in the way it was. No?
Irrelevant. I mean, if a territory has
That
been
is
cut
not
off, is
allowed.
irrelevant. Yeah. It does still exist. So therefore, I can't take it as an answer. But because we needed to clarify this point, I won't give you a strike either, and it's still your turn.
Okay, I'll take one more. Then Tanganyika.
Oh,
Brilliant.
yeah, Zanzibar. Yeah.
Brilliant. Wait a minute. He said Tanganyika, and what did you say, Shruti? You said Zanzibar. Both of you are correct. These two together, Tanganyika and Zanzibar, became Tanzania, and therefore you are both right, and it's back to Pranay. Well done. See, now we are heating up. You'll probably get all 25 at the end of this, randomly troubling me.
Indochina.
There's no such place called Indochina on my list.
It used to. Okay.
So that's a strike.
Yeah, that's a
Un-
strike.
unless you want to Google, and actually, why should you Google?
I have
I'll
an
Google.
answer for that.
Hmm.
I have an answer. Tibet.
Tibet is correct. Tibet is correct. For a very brief while, it was considered an
Yes.
independent country.
Thanks
So-
for the hint, Pranay.
Yeah. No, so Indochina was never actually a country per se. It was just an area. It was a geographical area. But you gave her a hint, and she got Tibet. And therefore, one strike against you, no strikes against Shruti, who thought she was going to lose. So, Pranay, it's on you. Don't take a second strike. Do you want a clue?
No. Wait. I'll let me. The Kingdom of Sikkim.
Brilliant. That's a clue I was going to give
Yeah.
you. One of them is part of India. So, the kingdom of Sikkim indeed is there. So, Shruti on you.
That was
I-
going to be my answer.
I can give you a clue.
Okay.
Hmm.
So this may be like one of these Germany type situations, but what about South Africa? The Union or the Republic or whatever that country of South Africa doesn't exist the way it exists today.
No, it's not. The way it existed, I already clarified, is not a this thing. It's the
Acha,
country
okay, that
exists.
won't
Yeah.
work. Okay.
Yeah, so I won't count it against you, but that, like I clarified earlier in the Sudan case, that doesn't work. Okay, I'll give you a
What are the
clue.
Asian
You guys,
countries?
I'll give you a
Okay.
clue. You guys got North Vietnam and South Vietnam. There's another North dash South dash, the same place.
So North Korea, South Korea is done. North Vietnam, South Vietnam is done.
North Korea, South Korea is not exactly done because they're new countries, but whatever. You're done with Korea, so
We're done with the Koreas. We're done with Vietnam. So you're saying there's one more North-South combination.
yeah. Think of the Arab region. Think of the Middle East, rather.
Middle East.
Actually, there are a number of answers in the Middle East,
Mm.
apart from the North and South thing.
In the Middle East, I can think of lots of countries that didn't exist in 1945, which exist today. I can't think of the other way around.
But in what form did they exist earlier? Like, what were they part of? So, a bunch of answers come from there.
They were part of the Ottoman Empire after that, right? I mean, Turkey
Before that.
came. That was in the First World War. So second.
No. Not what I'm
Wait,
thinking of.
I'll talk about. Okay, no, this is Shruti's chance. So I'm.
Yeah. You have one strike, Shruti has zero. So, could she.
I have a answer, but I can't remember the name. This is like that Ethiopia, Eritrea, all those used to combine one thing.
Hmm.
It was like one kingdom, and I can't remember the name of that thing. And should I bother remembering, Amit? Is that even the right space?
No, I don't think that was post 1945.
Okay, that's not post 1945. Okay, then screw that. What am I looking at, yeah? You're saying Middle East, there is something that we are missing.
You're missing a lot in the Middle East.
A country that...
Okay, I'll give you a clue. Are any of
What
you
about
fans?
why is Ottoman Empire not the right answer?
Because didn't it end in the First World War? We are talking
Yeah.
post 1945. Okay, I'll give you a clue. Do any of you watch Friends?
Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, I must have seen it when it came out first.
Yeah, so where did Chandler Bing allegedly move? That's the North and the South.
What?
Yeah. I think 15 dash road, comma dash. Dude,
Didn't he go to Tulsa or something like that? One
No,
city
no.
he went to.
Middle East, bro.
Okay, but I have some other ones. I think
No,
so.
but you wait for her to strike out, and then you
Yeah.
can strike out for a second time, and then she can strike out for a second time, and I'll have
Oh,
to
I
on
haven't
those.
struck out yet.
Yes,
Oh,
but you're
that is
getting.
incredible to me
It's
that I
incredible to
haven't yet
me as
struck out.
well. Yeah.
A north and south in the Middle East. I literally can't think of a thing. Do they say north and south?
They did when it existed. It doesn't exist now. It exists as X. Once upon a time, it was North X and South X, not South X as in Delhi ka South X, and
I got it.
and yeah, and Chandler Bing used to live there. So
So North Sudan and South Sudan is all I can think of.
अरे but
वो तो मिडिल ईस्ट में ही नहीं है.
वो मिडिल ईस्ट में कहाँ है?
मेरी geography में it's all somewhere.
यार Chandler Bing बता दिया, सब कुछ बता दिया. He lies. Okay, now I've Googled it to give you the exact data. In the TV show Friends, Chandler Bing lies to his ex-girlfriend Janice and says his company is transferring him to X at 15X Road X to avoid breaking up with her face to face. And the plan fails when Janice escorts him to the airport, forcing him to actually board flight 664 to X. Shame on
Okay,
you.
this is gonna sound crazy, but not only is my geography bad, I don't know Friends also. Like at this
You just
point,
said you
it's
watch
just-
Friends. I don't like Friends either. I prefer Seinfeld.
I
but the
watched
point
Friends
is...
like 15 years ago, dude.
Okay, cool. So anyway, forget this. Move on. Think about other possibilities.
Okay. No, it's a strike for me. No, I've taken too long. So strike me and go to Pranay. We both have one strike each.
We have striked her. Now it's up to you.
Okay. By chance?
Yes.
Palestine.
No, it was never a country.
What? It was the mandate of Palestine existed.
Not a country.
After
not a country.
47.
45 after the war ended. Okay. Anyways, East Yemen,
No.
West Yemen.
Bro, okay, I don't know what to do about this because
North
the north and
Syria,
south I was
South
looking
Syria.
for were North Yemen. Not Syria, North Yemen, South Yemen.
Oh,
तुम लोग क्या
I
कर
didn't
रहे
know
हो?
Yemen never
Yeah.
had a North Yemen
Yeah.
and a South Yemen. Who will know
Yeah,
this?
and this
dude?
is where this is where Chandler Bing went on flight 664.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so it was north and
I don't
Wait,
know
I
what to
have
do.
to
Should I
strike out
give
a
you
second
this?
time.
Yeah. I
The
won't.
only country I can think of which I'm not sure about where it and when it existed is Laos.
Not Laos
In
either.
the Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia grouping. Not Laos?
Not Laos. So both of you strike out. So I'll make the tiebreaker a detail of one of the answers. Okay. So one of the answers is United Arab Republic. The United Arab Republic was basically two countries, of which one seceded and the other one kept the name United Arab Republic till 1971, till it went back to whatever. So name
But hang
these
on
two.
a second. If you're not giving me South Africa, that's the same thing that happened, no? There's a
it's not-
bigger grouping, and then one of them gets to keep the name South Africa.
No, but the United Arab Republic itself changed, and the two countries went separate ways. So it was a split. So name the two countries, and this is fastest finger first. And if you can't name both
Okay,
countries,
so
if you get
Saudi
one
Arabia.
hang
right,
on a second.
Saudi Arabia.
name both countries.
And
I want-
UAE.
No. What? Which? Both of you give me two names. It could be the same answer, but both of you give me.
No,
two
that's what I'm
names.
saying. Saudi Arabia and UAE. That's the answer.
Okay, you're wrong. Pranay, go for it.
Oman and UAE.
You're wrong. None of these three names are correct, by the way. So just keep giving me names till one of you gets one name right.
Okay. Syria and Jordan.
That's it. Syria. You got Syria. Pranay wins. It's Syria and Egypt. So Pranay wins. Now some of the other countries.
This is insane.
Yeah, so some of the other countries were Newfoundland, which was a self-governing domain till 1949 when Canada took it over.
Congratulations to them.
Yeah.
Now you're
Then
going to
there are
include some British islands in the Caribbean, all this nonsense you're going to start
no,
including.
something close. There is Manchukuo and Mengjiang, which were Japanese puppet states
Japanese
till
Manchuria.
1945.
Yeah. Japanese
Yeah.
Manchuria.
So they were these puppet states. Then, according to one argument, Nazi Germany itself, the German Reich, which ceased to exist in May
Prussia,
1945.
depending on or Prussia, which they kept the name until much later, and eventually the Allied forces ended Prussia, right?
Then another Middle East formation, the Arab Federation of Iraq and Jordan. And this was founded in February 1958, dissolved 6 months later. Then there is a Mali Federation, which was Senegal and Mali. Then there was a Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, which separated into Zambia, Malawi, and Rhodesia. So I gave you Rhodesia, but it's whatever. I mean, it's close enough. Then there's a West Indies Federation between 58 and 62, which is some of these Caribbean islands. Then there is a Saar Protectorate, which was taken over by West Germany in 1957.
No, but if it's between 58 and 62, then they weren't a country in 1945, dude.
Oh, actually, my thing was countries which dissolved since 1945. But
That's not what you asked as a question. You said what were the countries that existed in 1945 that don't exist today?
This has no material bearing on what happened,
Right?
because
Isn't
none of
that
you
what he
answered
asked?
it anyway. Wait. This has no material bearing. None of you got it right
I noted down
anyway.
the question that you said.
Yes, but this has no material bearing.
Yeah, but
Even
we
if you
have a
don't accept it
terrible
as an
quiz
answer, none of
master.
you said it. Listen, I do the best I can. Then there's Federation of Malaya, the state of Somaliland, and Free Territory of Trieste, which was split between Italy and Yugoslavia eventually. And then there are a bunch of unrecognized places, and actually Rhodesia was one of them, but whatever. Republic of Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, then there was Biafra, then there was Katanga and South Kasai, Republic of Serbian Krajina, Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, and then there are Transky, Boputswana, Venda, and Siski. These are the four independent Bantustans dissolved in 94. And then finally, my friends, and you will kick yourself for not getting this, the Republic of South Maluku. So, on this note, I think we can
I am
move on.
embarrassed. I haven't heard of half these countries.
Yeah. So anyway,
We should
I
have
would
Pranay,
be able to point them on a map, like on
No.
a continent level, not even a actual level.
Should have got the Republic of Malaya, right? Like the Singapore
Republic
plus
of-
Malaysia, I think.
absolutely, and a couple others, but eventually, yeah. So because yeah,
This is the revenge on me. Geography questions are the revenge on me. Finally, Pranay has opened its khata and won a round.
See, I was not to know geography is your weak spot. I am finding these out because
Amit is pointing his finger at me.
A good infinite game is that in which both people have an equal chance of getting stuff. So I want you to get stuff, and unfortunately, in this particular case, what Pranay was to Amitabh Bachchan hits, you are to geography. We have established that, and hopefully, I will not be punished
But
for
I
this
gave
next
a
week.
good fight.
Yeah.
You gave a good fight. You
I
almost
put up
won.
a good fight. And Pranay has, Pranay has opened his account and finally won an infinite game.
Yes.
I'm just very thrilled about this. Now we are all at least in non-zero numbers. Okay, let's end my embarrassment. I think we've had enough infinite games.
So my recommendation today is a live performance of a great song called Something More by Julien Lage and the superb quartet that he put together in the Big Ears Festival sometime earlier this year. And to talk about that song, I'm first going to hark back to the great German philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who in his masterpiece Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus ended by saying, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must remain silent. And his larger point was that there are some things for which language is useless. Language cannot simply describe them. And I think many of those are the murmurings of the human soul, the things that we feel. And to even describe how inadequate language is for those things would require language, and therefore we get in an infinite, inarticulate loop. But music often gets there. Music is a language which can make you feel a particular way. The moment you try to put words to it, it becomes impossible. People often speak of the articulations of a guitar, and in this case, Julian Lage is one of the great modern guitarists, and this is just a great performance. And I don't even want to describe this performance because that would be silly. Words cannot describe it. You have to listen to it. But when I first heard it, and I heard it many times over and over again on loop, it almost felt like I was listening to somebody's heart, that or that this musical performance was giving voice to many feelings I had within me but couldn't quite articulate. It was absolutely magical, and it also shows you how music can be a language that unites all of us. Beautiful song, Something More by the Julian Lage Quartet. Do check it out. Pranay, it's your turn now, and I sent you this song. Did you listen to this song? Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did. I did enjoy it. It was great.
So what's your recommendation for today?
Yeah, so what I wanted to recommend is this person whose book collection has come out in a new reprint. So there are four, it's a book collection of four books. The novelist is Manohar Malgaonkar, one of India's well-known novelists. But just see his life trajectory, okay? He served in the army during World War II. He was a big game hunter, a farmer, a mine owner, an adventurer, a journalist, and a book writer. So, I mean, what a guy. How many lives did he live? Right? And he has these four books. My favorite one is The Sea Hawk. It's a work of historical fiction. All four books are about Indian independence and different eras on it. So there is one book called The Sea Hawk about Kanoji Angre and the Maratha Navy. And there are other books also around the same period. So it's a very nice read, very well done, and it is available in new reprints. So I would recommend people to get those. It captures a period of India which is not discussed that well. So that's my recommendation. And Shruti, what do you have to recommend for us?
Actually, I have a paper recommendation, and this recommendation comes from one of our past episodes, What a Wonderful World We Live In. And Amit briefly hinted at it, but a couple of listeners reached out to me on what is a good way to actually measure the progress that we've made, right? It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And that's both the great thing about progress, that things change so rapidly and so dramatically. But the downside is, as economists, it's really hard to measure. But fear not, there's a wonderful economist called William Nordhaus, also a Nobel laureate. And his paper on light and the history of light, and it's titled Do Real Output and Real Wage Measures Capture Reality? The history of lighting suggests not, right? Don't go by this really long and clunky title. It's a really lovely paper. And what he's trying to wrestle with is exactly this, right? So everything changes, which means goods and services we can buy change. The tools we use to produce them change. And what those goods ultimately give us, more children, longer lives, freedom from disease, that is even harder to quantify. So let's take something that didn't change, but also changed. And that is lighting, right? We can have light anytime we want, and we take it completely for granted. In fact, like poorer areas in some places are recognized because someone is studying under a street lamp, or it's a story that our grandparents told us. So what Nordhaus realized was that it makes little sense to compare the price of lighting, right? Because a price of a candle compared to a price of kerosene, or the energy used to produce, or electricity, or the modern bulb are completely different goods, and they are produced with completely different technologies. So instead, he does something really unique. He holds two things constant. Okay. So the first is the amount of light, which is measured as 1,000 lumen hours. That is 1,000 lumens of light for 1 hour, right? No matter how it's produced. It could be produced using candles or kerosene or electricity. And the second thing he holds constant is human time, right? Rather than comparing prices across centuries with the problems of inflation and currency and technology, he just asks, how long would someone have to work to buy this amount of light, which happens to be 1,000 lumens for 1 hour, right? And now this comparison suddenly makes things so much more tractable. And now we find that as recently as the year 1800, it took about 5.5 hours of labor, human labor, to buy 1,000 lumen hours using a tallow candle. Right? By the year 1883, that had fallen to about 45 minutes of human labor using Edison's electric light. By 1992, with a fluorescent bulb, it took less than half a second. And now we can measure it in microseconds. Right? This paper was published in 1996. I think, his examples end in 1992, but we can extend it to the modern period. And it is hard to understate just how much progress we've made when we try to think about it in terms of how hard do we have to work for something that we consider essentially like just most fundamental to our life, which is light after hours of sunlight. And output has grown by a factor of roughly 900 to 1600 since the 19th century. So it's one of my favorite papers. It's beautifully written. Don't go by the clunky title. And it'll give you a sense of what a great world we live in.
Will we talk about intelligence like this in a few years, right? Like instead of electricity, it would be intelligence.
Yeah. So we would need to compare, how many hours it took to produce a particular thing, as opposed to like different people having different IQs. Yeah, that would be a wonderful experiment.
How many hours would it take to
Right? Boil
produce?
it all down to compute.
How many hours would it take to produce one Amit? How many hours did it take to produce one Shruti? Well, anyway, leaving that aside, these are not questions
It's a
that
slightly
are
vulgar question.
meant to be non-rhetorical. But so we've done our longest episode yet, but we had to do our longest episode because this is an important subject. Because our listeners,
Yeah, and it's a fantastic book. The book is not long though.
the book is not long, but you should spend time going through it carefully because honestly, this episode, fun as it was, can't really do it justice. Absolutely fantastic book, Fiscal Fables by Pranay Kothastane and Sarthak Pradhan. Go out to your nearest bookstore, online or offline, and buy it. But before you do that, like, share, subscribe, comment. Tell us how you like the book. Tell us how you like this episode. Give us suggestions. What can we do differently? What can we keep the same? How much effort should we do to produce more light? Let us know.